Excellent. Well, look, it's lovely to be back here again, and you know, in a conference like this, when I guess the focus is on being still and on thinking in a different way that creates a less frantic pace in our learning. When I was a kid, that's me in the middle, every holidays we used to go down to Sorrento Back Beach, or not every holidays, but very often down to Sorrento Back Beach in Victoria. And it's a fantastic beach, fantastic surf beach. But one thing about Sorrento Back Beach is that there are some very dangerous rips. And my father taught me about rips from a very young age, because obviously if you're going to spend much time in the water at Sorrento, you need to understand rips. The thing about a rip is that if you get caught in a rip current, there's a strong movement of water pushing you out to sea. So you really have three choices. There are three ways you can respond to being caught in a rip current. One is you can struggle to get back to the beach. You can swim against the current back towards the beach. That's what most people do and drown. Apparently six people die every week in Australian waters in rip currents. Isn't that during the summer months? Isn't that an amazing thing? And almost all of them die because they're trying to swim against the current and it exhausts them to the point where they drown. The second option that you have is to just give up and let the current wash you out to sea. Strangely, that's better than trying to swim against the current. You're less likely to drown if you just let the current wash you out. But you're still quite likely to drown. The third option, and really the only good one, is to understand how rip currents work. And instead of trying to either swim into the current or letting it just take you away, is to understand it and to understand that if you swim sideways at a right angle to the current will just naturally push you into the beach. I look at schools today and I see a lot of struggling going on, and it's increasing. You know, with Facebook and mobile phones and YouTube, do we ban these things? Do we block these things? Our students are trying to use them. We're trying to stop them. You know, so we put blocks and filters on our networks and they find proxies that get them around it. And there's all this struggling. And the way I look at it, those kinds of things, mobile media players, in a lot of ways are like a rip current. And what I see us trying to do is to struggle against the current. And we're not doing so well. I think what we're doing is we're becoming more and more irrelevant to the lives of young people. You know, they're apparently becoming less and less engaged with learning. You know, because one thing that we can, I think, all agree on is that we're all educators and parents and society, and I'd say even kids, want to be is on the beach. We all want to be learning and we want to be engaged. I mean, if you ask a student, do you want to learn? Of course they want to learn. They might not like the way that we're helping them to do that at school or trying to, but they want to learn. And if we ask them, do you want to be engaged? Do you want to be enjoying your learning? Of course they do. We all want the same thing. We all want to be on the beach, but it seems like there's this tension. While we want our students to be on the beach of learning and engagement, and they want to be there too, there's this current that's pulling them the other way. So again, I think what we need to do is we need to be looking at that. We need to understand the current and use it to take us to where we want to go. I love this quote from Marshall McLuhan: "We shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us." You know, I think that you can pretty much define what it means to be human by that quote. That, you know, to me, that's what separates us from other animals, from other primates, is that we'll take a tool and allow that tool not only to solve the problem that we designed it for, but to change us. Whether we're talking about stone tools from our ancient ancestors or electricity or whatever it is, we shape a tool and then the tool changes how we live and how we interact with our world. And I think that these days when we see our kids walking around and they're texting all the time and they come home from school and they go straight to Facebook, we think there's something wrong with the way that they're living, because it's different to the way that we grew up. But I want to make the case that maybe there's something right about the way they're living, or at the very least, there's something very human about the way they're living. Because what they're doing is they're taking the tools that our generation have shaped and allowing those tools to shape them and the way that they interact with their world. That's a uniquely human thing to do. It's just, I think, that the pace of that change is so fast that it scares us at the moment, particularly. And the pace is incredibly fast. This is a little live ticker on my screen here, you can see. Since I switched to this slide, there have been over 100 videos uploaded to YouTube. It takes your breath away. YouTube claims that every minute, 72 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube. Isn't that amazing? In the half hour that I'm going to speak to you, 75 days worth of video will have been uploaded to YouTube. You know, we can't keep up with it. It's so fast. I started teaching in 1986. That's a younger version of me and my then girlfriend, now my wife. And 1986, it doesn't seem all that long ago to me, but when I look at what's happened since then, the changes in the world have been breathtaking. You know, mobile phones have been introduced since I became a teacher, and that's changed our language even. I mean, most of you look at that and see, if you see someone drowning and then there's a bad icon of somebody waving for help. If you show that to teenagers, they're just confused. They think that's cruel, to see someone drowning and laugh out loud. Our language has changed. But more seriously, computers have gone. That's a 1986 IBM portable computer. It was kind of portable, but it was like a suitcase, compared to computers today that are thousands of times more powerful, but you can put them into a bag and barely even feel the change in weight. It's phenomenal how fast that's happened. The World Wide Web has happened since I became a teacher. I mean, that's phenomenal, isn't it? When you think of the changes in society, and that's just since I met my wife. It's unbelievable. The global positioning system has happened since I became a teacher 25 years ago. Medicine has, other industries rather, have been transformed by technology. When you think about it, the changes and the way that other industries have taken these changes have been deeply profound. This is an fMRI machine, a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. Amazing, this machine can watch a person think. You can put someone in a machine and have them think about an object and watch which parts of the brain respond to it. We've learnt more about the brain in the last 7 or 8 years from fMRI machines than we learnt in all of previous history. It's amazing what's happened. And in the world of genetics, the changes in paternity testing and forensics and, crime detection has been completely revolutionised by technology. And again, in the world of genetics, I'm a biology teacher, by the way, but in the world of genetics, we've now found the gene that codes for the green fluorescent protein in these jellyfish. And we've been able to cut that gene out and splice it into the genome of a mouse. And what do you know? Glow-in-the-dark green mice. It's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, mice and jellyfish diverged on the evolutionary timescale 500 million years ago, and now technology is allowing us to even mix genes from one species to another. It's like what's happened in the world, if you think about it, is technology in other industries has allowed, it was like a barrier that stopped us going any further. And technology has allowed us to jump that barrier and do things that were just science fiction before. But in education, there's a classroom in 1986 when I started teaching, and there's a classroom this year. Really, there's not that much difference, is there? I mean, the board's a different colour. But, if you were to take a geneticist out of a genetics lab in 1986 and transport them through time and space and put them into a genetics lab now, they would have no idea what was going on. They wouldn't know what people were doing. They wouldn't know what the machines were. They wouldn't even know half the words that people were saying. But if you take a teacher out of 1986 and transport them into a modern classroom, I think they'd know exactly what was going on, don't you? I don't think the parents would even complain that their son or daughter was being taught by a teacher straight out of 1986. We really haven't changed very much. And sure, we've got interactive whiteboards and other we've been putting technology into schools, haven't we? But that's exactly my point. We've adopted technology, sure, like the rest of the world, but where other industries have taken technologies that let them do new things. They've said, here's a new tool, that will let us do new things. What we've done, I think, is we've said, here's a new tool, how can we make that fit into the school in a way that doesn't make us change the way we do things? So we've welcomed interactive whiteboards, and they are a great tool, don't get me wrong, but I think we've welcomed those because we can still stand in front of our class and do that banking education that Serge was talking about just the way we always have done. It doesn't really cause any pedagogical change. We're just using a better tool to do the same thing we've always done. You know, interactive whiteboards, we're happy with those because it's fundamentally the same as when we wrote on a blackboard. We're quite happy for our students to use the internet to do research because it's not fundamentally different from when we took them to the library and they did research using encyclopedias or the card catalogue and books. Is it? They're still doing much the same. You know, the pedagogy is the same. We're quite happy for them to use PowerPoint. You know, we've welcomed that tool because it's fundamentally the same as when two kids held up a big poster and they talked about it. You know? But anything that's disruptive, anything that's completely different or off the chart that doesn't fit into our existing model, we have tended to reject. You know? We've always wanted, when we looked into the future, we've always wanted mobile technologies, haven't we? Because we dreamed about them. You know, these are dreams are on the screen here. You know, Maxwell Smart's shoe phone, the Star Trek Communicator. These were things that when we've looked into the future and said, what will be cool about the future? It was always that you'd have communication devices that didn't have to be connected to anything. You could just communicate with anyone, anywhere, anytime. And now we have those devices, but our response to them. By the way, there's an app. If you want a Star Trek communicator, there's an app for that. But our response to these, our response to having these cool tools now is to say, no, we won't have them. We don't want them. We'll reject them because they don't fit into our existing pedagogical structures. I see signs up everywhere in schools saying, you know, no mobile phones. Sometimes they're creative. I particularly like this one. But you know, however we say it, we're saying we don't want these. But we're at this point in history, I think 2012, this is an important time in history because I'm seeing schools starting to introduce iPads. And just looking around the room, look how many of you have got them. People are starting to realise that in this post-PC era, more and more people are going to have iPads. I see schools rolling them out into whole year levels. And the thing about an iPad is it's everything that we don't like in mobile phones. Isn't that? Apart from the fact that you can't actually talk to somebody on the phone, kids don't do that anyway. But they can text from it. And in fact, Apple has just recently, in the last update, released the Imessage App for the iPad. And unlike other apps, this lets you text. So you can send a text message to other iPads or to iPhones. Unlike other apps, you can't even delete it from the device. So if we're not letting kids bring mobile phones because we think texting is going to be a distraction, but we are rolling out iPads, do you see that there's a disconnect? It doesn't make sense. And the next operating system, which was released last night, and I haven't had a good look at it, but I think that they were saying that it will have messages built, and it does, Serge is nodding, has iMessage built right into the operating system as well. So even computers will be going that way. It's time that we stopped saying, let's block things, let's ban things, and we started welcoming technology and saying, now how can we swim sideways in this current so that the current washes us into the beach of learning and engagement? Because at the moment, I think we're still drowning in it. So here's the thing, is I want to talk about, I guess, two ways that I think the current can help us wash towards learning and engagement. The first of those is, I think we need to understand, if we're going to understand this current, we need to understand that students increasingly expect access to content and people on demand all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I love this video. This is an interview between Conan O'Brien and Louis C.K. It's only very short, but Louis C.K. reflecting on the impatience of people, how we want access to things right now.
Ridiculous.
Yes.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you? Yeah. I was on an airplane, and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane, and they go, open up your laptop, you can go on the internet. And it's fast, and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. and they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, this is bull. Like how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
You know, but see, this is what's happening is, and whether we think it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's kind of a moot point because it's just a thing. This is the way the current is flowing. You know, remember when we were kids and there was that new David Bowie album? I was a David Bowie fan, and you'd wait until Saturday morning, you'd go down to Brash's and you remember that store, and you'd buy the record from there. You know, nobody buys music that way anymore. You know, you just go on iTunes or some other place online and you can download it immediately, right here when you want it. You don't have to wait till the weekend anymore. We're seeing the same thing very quickly happen with books. You know, people apparently are reading more than ever, the statistics are saying, but they're buying fewer and fewer books. You know, and we're seeing in Shepparton, all the bookshops have closed. We used to have 4 or 5 of them. They've all closed down now, except for one. We've got a Collins bookshop, but Angus and Robertson left, Bookworld left. You know, selling out stock because people just aren't buying their books that way. Some of them they're buying from Amazon, but a lot of it we're buying from, you know, as ebooks, straight onto our Kindles and our iPads, and it's so much more convenient. But the thing is, we can get it now. Someone can say to me, I think you should read this book, I think you'd love it, and I can just download it right there and then. I don't have to wait until I can find it in a bookshop. But it's not only even access to content, but access to people. You know, this is a screenshot of my son's screen. You know, you can see he's got MySpace open talking to one group of friends. He's got Facebook open talking to another group of friends. You know, he's got Wikipedia open and a folder of homework because he saw me coming into the room as well. But, you know, he's got, his world is full of interaction and connectivity. He comes home from school, you know, it's a race to get to the computer to see who can log on first onto Facebook. You know, and my wife says, what can you possibly have to say to these people? You've been with them all day. See, but it's not, for them, it's not about the topic of conversation. It's not what they're talking about that's important to them. It's just the fact that they're talking. It's just this need they feel to be connected to each other all the time. But at school, we're still saying you can learn between 9 and 3:30. You can't learn anywhere, anytime. You can learn between 9 and 3:30. And if you want history, you know, well, that's period 2 on a Tuesday. And you've got a double period Wednesday afternoon and a single on, you know. It doesn't resonate with the way that young people's lives are increasingly moving, which is that they want access to content anywhere, anytime. They want access to people anywhere, anytime. How do we fix that? Well, you know, there are a number of ways I think that we can fix it. I want to suggest a few of them right now. A few ways that we can make learning anywhere, anytime, accessible on demand. Discussion boards are a classic example of this, so that a student can be at home and they can ask a question when they think of it. They don't have to wait until tomorrow when they're in class, period 3, to ask their teacher. They can just ask it right now. I've always had a discussion board, at least since 2004, but last year a very interesting thing happened. Partway through the year, it was about this time last year actually, one of my students said, Mr. Douch, there's something that we need to talk to you about. And I said, I'm listening. And they said, well, we've started a Facebook group for this class and we like it much better than your discussion board, so we're all using that. You can come with us if you'd like to. So of course that created a few, you know, interesting moments in my mind where I thought, oh, is this what I want to do or not? I went and had a look at their Facebook group and it blew me away. Because over a week, don't bother trying to read it, but over a week, it's too small text there, but just the volume of comments over a period of a week or two, there were literally hundreds of comments. These kids were talking with each other all day and night. We found that I could put lessons on there and they can watch them right in the Facebook wall and then ask questions about it. Kids were taking photos of experiments we were doing in class and putting those on the wall. It was just this 24-hour-day, 7-day-a-week continuation of the class. It was fabulous. And what was amazing about it, or what I guess I hadn't predicted even, was that on my discussion board, the best students would go there quite frequently, but the weaker students didn't. Once we moved to a Facebook group, the students who were there the most were the students who never went to my discussion board. The ones who went to my discussion board, they were there just as much as they ever were, but the students who were there the most were the weaker students, because they're the very same students who are wasting all their time in the evening on Facebook. But when they're on their own Facebook page talking about the football or whatever, and somebody writes a comment on the biology discussion group, they still get a little notification flag and they click on it and it says someone's written something on that. They can't resist clicking to see what that comment is. It's dragging them into the conversation. Do you see what I'm talking about? This is like the current. If we just swim sideways a little bit, the current washes these kids into learning and engagement. It brings them along. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should, for a minute, friend students on Facebook. I don't think that's wise to do at all. But you don't need to here. You don't need to be a friend with any of your students to be involved in a group. It's a closed group. Nobody needs to be friends with anybody else to participate in this group. But it just sits in this beautiful integrated way that uses what they're already doing to wash them into the shore. Podcasting is another great example, I think, of a way that we can have our students learning anywhere, anytime, give them access to content. I started listening to a podcast back in 2005.
When they go to school, they're told to leave those, quote, toys at home. They're not to be used in school. Instead, the system continues teaching as if these kids belong to the last century by standing in front of a blackboard. Is he right?
Yep.
But there's also a difference between technology.
And I was driving to school, and I've got a 20-minute drive to school and a 20-minute drive home, thereabouts. So, 30 to 40 minutes a day, I'm sitting in my car driving to school. It's dead time. It's crazy busy at school, you know what that's like, and it's busy at home. But here's my drive time, and I was sitting here, and it was like having this lovely, chatty, conversational, it was like a panel of experts sitting in the back seat of my car discussing what was happening in the world of technology. And I was thinking, this is fantastic. It's like doing my professional reading, but it's not taking any of my time. It's freeing up my home time when I would have been trying to keep up to date with all of this stuff by letting this conversation just happen around me in the car on my drive time. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be fantastic if my students could be learning biology from a podcast? So I made them a podcast. I'll play a little sample of it for you. Here you go. This is Douch's Biology, episode 11 for 2012, the Department of Defence. Isn't this the coolest way to study? You're sitting on the bus or you're in the canteen queue, you've got your headphones on. Look around. Everyone who sees you thinks you're listening to some cool music. Well, let's let them think that, shall we? Just nod your head and tap your foot. I won't tell them what you're doing if you don't. It'll be our little secret. And in the meanwhile, let's study biology. Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to the Virtual Biology Club. That'll do. But it's sort of it's sort of entertaining, but it's educational, and we'll answer emails and voicemails that students send in, so it's a bit like talkback radio, and but kids can listen to it while they're walking to school, or while they're on the bus, or while they're in the canteen queue, walking the dog. I mean, we've all got downtime when you can be doing something that's a relaxing activity, but educational, and that frees up time at those critical other times. I put this podcast up on the iTunes store so my students could access it, and it amazed me. I went back in 3 weeks, and my podcast, if I searched for biology, my podcast came up as the #1 hit. Isn't that, don't you think, amazing? Thank you. It's amazing to me that a teacher with no IT background and no audio background would make a podcast for 20 students in North Central Victoria, and in 3 weeks it's the #1 biology podcast in the world. I think that's extraordinary, and it says two things. Firstly, there was no competition whatsoever. but secondly, there are a lot of people who want to learn by listening to a podcast, and in fact, there are about 1,000 downloads a day of my podcast. I make maybe one episode a week to a fortnight, so we're talking maybe 7,000 to 14,000 people that are listening to my podcast. I mean, it's extraordinary when you think about that. I've got 1,000 students at my school. There's like maybe 10 times that many students who are listening to each podcast that I make. Don't tell me that kids don't want to learn or that they're not engaged with learning. They just want to learn in a way that's natural, that they can learn anywhere, anytime, like the way they're absorbing all the rest of their content. You know, this is Karen, and people from all over the place. Karen couldn't do biology at her school because it was blocked against another subject that she had to do. But her principal allowed her to do biology without going to class because she was listening to my podcasts. And she got straight A pluses, and she's doing some kind of medical course at Melbourne Uni. Nathan sent me an email saying he got halfway through the year and was diagnosed with leukemia and had to leave school and spend a lot of time at the Royal Children's Hospital. And obviously a kid in that situation, their grades aren't going to be too good, are they? But his grades in biology went up by 3 grades because you can be convalescing in a hospital bed and still be learning by listening to a podcast. You don't need to be at school. A 13-year-old girl from Oklahoma City sent me an email saying that she was bored at school because they're making her do Year 7 science. So she'd gone onto the internet to find someone who would teach her at a level that would extend and challenge her. And she'd found my Year 12 biology podcast. A middle-aged woman from Alaska who never got her high school diploma. And that was her goal, was to get her high school diploma. But it's pretty hard when you're a mum. You've got dishes to wash and kids to run around town. But she could listen to a podcast while she was doing those things. She could multitask her learning with the other things that she needed to do. What never ceases to amaze me is the excitement. You know, again, it's this current washing kids in. You know, I walked into class and one of my kids said, you know, that there's a song about your podcast on YouTube. And I said, come again? And she said, no, have a look. So we had a look. And here it is. I'll play a little bit of it for you. Here we are. Let me just...
You're more important than a chloroplast. The first line of defense against stress is your podcast. Oh, Douchy, we could never hate you. Your podcast is so hot that my proteins are denatured. So nod your head and tap your foot and get...
You know, but it's amazing, isn't it? Don't you think? I mean, in all the years I was teaching before I started using podcasts, nobody ever wrote a song about being in my science class. And she's not the first one. There's been a number of them. It's amazing to me. I gave a revision lecture at Monash Uni a little while ago in the lead up to the exams. And one of the girls who was at the revision lecture went back to her school and told her teacher about the lecture, not knowing that her teacher was a friend of mine. The teacher sent me a tweet on Twitter, and this is what it said. Isn't that nuts? You know, I sort of feel like I need to remind you that I'm a science teacher, you know? But it's crazy. The last time I did a revision lecture, I was there for an hour afterwards just signing books and having my photo taken with kids because they were so excited to actually meet me in person. You know, and again, it's this crazy thing that if kids can learn in a way that suits them, the current just washes them where we want them to go. But so often what we're doing is we're banning iPods in schools. We're banning mobile players in schools because we think they'll be a distraction. They'll be disruptive to the learning that we're trying to get our kids to do. Meanwhile, the kids are fighting against that and being washed out to sea. All we need to do is let them use the technology but understand it and swim intelligently so that the current washes us in the direction that we need to go. Other teachers are doing this. Well, actually, this was me too, but you know, a Night Sky podcast lets me teach my astronomy students at a time that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. Fantastic. A group of English teachers who record a roundtable podcast. They literally sit around their lunch table and talk about a character or a novel or whatever. I mean, again, it lets them teach their students in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. A dance teacher who wanted her students to be able to practice more so that they could get the steps right before the recital. So she recorded her voice over the track they'd choreographed. She could be upstairs in her, a girl could be upstairs in her bedroom at night going through the steps and hearing Mrs. McGregor's instructions over the music. You know, it's fantastic, letting her practice more. People use this in all sorts of different ways. I suggested our metalwork teachers should make a podcast. And they didn't get the concept, but I haven't given up yet. I think screencasts are also a fantastic way of being able to let kids have access to learning anywhere, anytime. And you know, the Khan Academy's got a lot of publicity over the last 12 months for doing this kind of thing. But you know, it's amazing because you know, this is the same kind of lesson I would have once given standing in front of my genetics class. But now I can give that lesson on YouTube, and students can watch it as many times as they want to. They can pause it, they can rewind it, they can come back and watch it again later on when they've forgotten it. There are so many advantages of doing it this way. Plus, of course, What we tend to do in class, if I was teaching a lesson like that in class, is I would tend to give maybe 3 examples in class. And you give 3 examples of this kind of problem because after the first example, most students don't get it. It's kind of complex. After the third example, most students get it, so we move on. But there are some students who still haven't got it. They're frustrated. There were some students who actually did get it after the first example, and we've just bored them by making them sit through 2 more examples. I mean, here's an example of what I'm talking about from a series of videos that I put onto YouTube. You can see that after the first example, approximately half of the students who watched the first example didn't feel it was necessary to watch the second example. And then approximately half of the students who watched the second example didn't feel it was necessary to watch the third example. But if I stopped after that third example, all of the students from here on, they still don't get it, and now the class is moving on. But these kids here, all of those kids have been bored by watching me give a third example of something they already understand. If I record that as a series of 8 or 9 videos, the student who gets it after the first one can stop there and do something else that will challenge and extend them. The student who doesn't get it, even after the third example, can watch the fourth and the fifth with no embarrassment. So it's better. And the tools to make screencasts and podcasts are just getting easier and easier to use and better to the point where now I think I can probably teach better this way than I can live in a classroom anyway. And other teachers, again, using this is just one example that I've picked out of many, but one that I really like. This is our photography teacher, who you'll never see him showing kids how to use Photoshop in the classroom. You know, over on this computer, a virtual Mr. Short will be explaining how you add a vector mask. And over on this computer, a virtual Mr. Short will be showing a kid how to crop a photo. But the real Mr. Short will be working with kids doing that aesthetic stuff the stuff you can't record because it's individual. It's about the kid's individual project and aesthetics and art and using the sensibility. I mean, it's just brilliant. What he's done is he's just freed up all of his class time to work on those human aspects of the class by automating the Photoshop techniques. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the first thing is that students are expecting access to content and people all the time. And there's a few suggestions how I think we can do it and that I've seen work. The second is that the knowledge economy is ending.
What?
Just kidding.
This is 1990.
Good. To find out how you...
Look at this. I always wondered where my mandibula was.
Mm-hmm. To find out how you can own the new encyclopedia...
We're studying the environment right now. Look at all this great stuff on ecosystems.
I don't know if you remember that ad. I do, actually. But that was Encyclopedia Britannica's biggest year. They sold more encyclopedias that year than any other year before or since, at a cost of Australian $2,200 per set. Earlier this year, Encyclopedia Britannica announced that they're no longer printing the encyclopedia. That's the end. They've been printing since 1700 and something. Hundreds of years they've been printing the encyclopedia. This year, they're just not, it's not worth it. They're not selling enough to continue. At the same time, they announced an iPad app. You can I got kind of excited about this because you can download the Encyclopedia Britannica iPad app for free from the iTunes store. And I thought, fantastic. So I downloaded it. The first article I looked at, I was kind of disappointed because then it said that you had to pay $15 a year to see the full article, otherwise you only see the abstract. And at that point, I balked at the idea and I thought, ooh, I don't think I want to pay $15 a year for the Encyclopedia Britannica. See, what I think that illustrates is just how quickly the value of knowledge has fallen over the last 20 years. You know, once upon a time, if you wanted your students to be successful at school, $2,000 was a fair price for all that knowledge. But now they can get it on Google, they can get it on Wikipedia. You know, something has value because it's scarce. Knowledge isn't scarce anymore. Kids have access to the same pool of knowledge that Encyclopedia Britannica has. And so the value, the commercial value of that knowledge has dropped significantly. A student of mine from a few years ago did a science degree. And she was a very personable student. She did a science degree at Melbourne Uni, and then she decided to become a teacher. And she got a holiday job before she did her dip ed, answering telephones at the reception for the Department of Primary Industries in Spring Street in Melbourne. And they asked her, would you stay on? You know, and she thought, well, I'll do that so that I can earn enough money to put myself through my dip ed without having to work part-time. And within 8 months, she'd been promoted from answering telephones on the front desk to writing reports directly for the Minister for Agriculture. Isn't that amazing? And I'd recommended a book that she should read called The Element by Ken Robinson. Many of you have probably read their book. And she sent me a series of texts one day telling me about having read the book. And this is what she said. I just thought I'd take a screenshot. See, it's impossible to think that in 1986 that a kid could have been that successful without the knowledge that was required to do the job. But now she can access the knowledge, and what she had was the EQ. She had the social skills to be able to network with people to bring it all together into a report. So it's not that knowledge isn't important anymore, it's just that it's not scarce, and so the commercial value of it has dropped. Another example that I love is this 20Q thing, and my kids play this in the car every time we go somewhere. But it's this fantastic little $10 toy that asks you to think of an object. So, I'm thinking of a water glass, and it asks you 20 questions. Is it bigger than a duck? Is it fun to play with? Can you drop it? Can you eat it? And you say yes, no, and then it says you're thinking of a glass. And you think that's incredible that a $10 toy can tell me with surprising accuracy time and time again what object I'm thinking of. But it does make me wonder whether the next time someone in my family is sick, instead of taking them to see our GP, whether there's some kind of a toy that can do that work. Because, really, when you go and see your GP, if you think about it, most of the time what the GP does is they just follow a decision tree that brackets to yes-no answers, which they've memorised. And in the 20th century, the ability to do that was a killer skill. Not many people could do it, could memorise a big body of knowledge and then systematically access it on demand. But now machines can. And we're seeing this happen all over the place. How many of us, you don't need very many bank tellers anymore, because so many of us do our banking online or at ATMs. Similarly, when you go to fly, you don't have to check in, you don't have to see a person to check in anymore. You do it online. And even when you get to the airport, there's all those little self-service ones that automate the process. And when you get there, you don't even have to take your bags to a person anymore. At least at Tullamarine in Melbourne, there's a self, do-it-yourself bag drop now. And we're automating the process. Once upon a time, if you wanted an uncontested divorce, you don't want to fight over property or anything, you just want to get away from each other, you had to pay thousands of dollars to a lawyer to make sure the process was done right. Now, you can just go to divorce.com.au and do it yourself. I'm a little bit worried that a few people are typing things down at the moment. But it's not that we won't need lawyers in the future. Of course we'll still need lawyers, but we'll need lawyers who don't just know about the law, but also who have those, who are able to argue a compelling case in front of a jury, the kinds of lawyers who can sit in a contested divorce and negotiate, have those much more right-brain skills. Because so much of what we're doing is being automated. The value of knowing things is less important than it once was. Remember when you're on a plane and the hostesses do their little safety routine? Look, I was on a plane a little while ago. It was an Air New Zealand flight, and they didn't do that. Instead, the screens came down and a virtual host and hostess explained the safety features of the plane, and the real hosts and hostesses were walking down the aisles interacting with people. And I thought, how fantastic is that? There's a kid crying, and the guy pulled out a lollipop and he gives a lollipop to the kid. And I thought, how fantastic is that? What this airline had done is they'd automated what could be automated, so that their people can do what is uniquely human. And that's a key point here, because what the point I'm trying to make here is that if we're going into our classrooms and standing in front of a whiteboard and explaining the same thing over and over again, it's not that much different to an air hostess coming out and doing this automated, like an automaton, a robot dance showing the safety features of the plane. Because the old model of schooling, this banking knowledge of schooling that Serge was talking about, what we do is we go into the classroom in the morning and we spend our day talking to our students while they sit and listen. And then, at night time, we send them home to consolidate their learning by themselves alone. And the solution to that, where this, to me, all of this fits together beautifully, is in what we're now calling the flipped model of learning, flipped learning. And why I love this is the idea is that there's still value in teachers explaining things to students. I don't think that teachers should be standing in front of their students telling them knowledge. Students can find that themselves in the ways that Serge was talking about. But there's value for teachers to explain concepts, because teachers understand the concepts, hopefully, and they understand the students, and they can act as that medium between a complex subject and a student who doesn't understand it. That's the value of a teacher in the classroom. But anything I feel I need to explain that way, I can do that in a screencast or in a podcast. I don't need to do it live in the classroom. And if my students need to ask questions, they can do that on a discussion board, or in my case, on a Facebook group. They can do that anywhere, anytime. They don't have to be in the classroom for that. And that means that in class, I can be working with students who don't understand, one-on-one. But also, they can be doing the homework that I would have set them to do at home. And we can do more role plays and more discussions and more debates and more practical activities and, again, those kinds of learning that Serge was talking about that actually take more time, the elicitive learning and that are more time consuming, but better. We've got time for that now because we're not doing the banking learning. Let me finish by just talking about what this has meant for my class. And this was my 2006 class. And, because people sort of say, do the results improve when you do this? Well, I really want to talk about engagement, but just to answer that question, yes, they do. Since I started doing this in 2006, on average, over those 6 years, on average, students' grades have gone up by 2 grades. Across all of those, if you take all those students and average them together, students who should have got a B+ are getting an A+. This is based on benchmarking tests that the Victorian government does. But which doesn't surprise me really, because in the past I was just doing this shallow coverage of everything. We had to get through the whole curriculum, so we did everything to a shallow depth. Now, we've got time to go really deep on things. We've got time to really explore things. We've got time to do more discussions and more debates and more role plays and more modelling activities and just all these other kinds of things, including just spending time building rapport in the classroom, having fun in the classroom, just enjoying. So not only is their learning more meaningful at home, is that current washing them into the beach of learning and engagement, but in class we're doing things that are more engaging as well, so that current's washing them in to the beach of learning and engagement as well. So this class in 2006, look, I like to finish by telling this story, and some of you have probably heard it before, but the very last day of that class, when I said goodbye to them, when normally a class gets up and they push their chairs in and there's all that noise and movement, this class, they just sat there. And when a second time, after a few minutes had passed, I said, it's lunchtime, it's time to go now, they just sat there. And then one of them burst into tears, and then another one. And before I knew it, easily half of them, had tears running down their faces. I've never seen anything like it before. And when they'd finally left, my inbox was full of emails. And I want to just show you 2 of those, snippets out of 2 of those, which I think capture what pretty much all of the emails said. And I'll let you just read them for a moment. They're only short. See the connection that these kids are making between the technology and how engaged they are with their classmates. And I want to finish with this slide. This is Sarah, and Sarah, like many students who finished the year, stayed on the discussion board answering questions from students from the next year. So on that Facebook group now, I don't do very much at all. Most of the questions are answered by other students, and very often they're answered by students from previous years who are still there answering the questions of this year's students. One of those is Sarah, who also has turned up sometimes at school to participate in actually making the podcast. She will make sections of the podcast, bring them in, and we'll include those. She'll teach a part of the course. She loves it. Somebody wrote, and it was actually a teacher, an English teacher, who wrote on the discussion board one day, she'd seen Sarah participating, and wrote on there, I think a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but wrote, Sarah, you're no longer a biology student. Someone should have probably pointed that out to you, or something like that. And this was Sarah's response, and I want to just read it to you because I think it's fabulous. She said, this was her response on the discussion board, she said, I'm a true student. I'm enrolled in life. I don't just learn because of the assessment ahead of me. I learn because I love learning. So when the assessment is over, I still see myself as a student. In biology, I learned more than proteins and DNA. I learned what it means to be connected with educated people who love learning, and there's no reason why that should be over just because I've completed the exam. Assessment should measure learning, not be the reason for it. I want to keep learning biology, so I still consider myself a biology student, so don't say I'm not. So don't... So that's what I'm talking about. If we just, instead of fighting against kids' desire to be involved with all of this technology, if we just say, let's stop struggling to ban it and block it, and let's not give up either. Let's not just friend students on Facebook and just, let all hell break loose. We're not going to do that either. But if we understand where their choices are going, if we understand the current of technology and intelligently swim to a place where the technology will push us to where we want to go, those are the kinds of results that I see all the time, and it's just been a real privilege to share them with you this morning. Thank you very much.